This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Mercury. Whether you're ramping up advertising ahead of the holidays or boosting inventory before a new launch, get the cash you need to grow. Mercury is a financial software company loved by over 200,000 startups and small businesses, and they now offer working capital loans specifically for e-commerce companies. Features include holistic underwriting that looks at all your sales platforms so you get the best possible offer, a fixed weekly payback schedule for better financial planning, and no personal guarantee or prepayment penalties. Confidently fund what's next with Mercury Working Capital. See if you're eligible at mercury.com/CTC. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, director of digital product strategy here at Common Threat Collective. And I'm joined today, as I usually am, by Taylor Holiday, who's our CEO here. Taylor, standing proudly in front of his framed growth map in his brand new desk setup. What's that behind next to your growth map there? Who's that?
You know who that is.
Can't really see.
That's a signed picture of Carmi.
Oh my God. Wow. I had never noticed that before. Signed by Jeremy Allen White himself?
Yes, signed by Jeremy Allen White, right there.
When and how did this happen?
It was a gift from Deshaun for my birthday.
Incredible.
Great
wow,
gift.
The best gift you could ask for.
So if you don't know Jeremy Allen White, star of The Bear, Carmi, we use bear metaphors here at CTC for a lot of the work we do about setting the standard and use this sort of restaurant metaphor in creating amazing work. And so this was a gift from one of my employees that just as a reminder every day to hold the standard.
Yeah, there you go. And here's a segue for you. Carmi works in the restaurant business, and restaurant businesses are always in distress. And that's what we're talking about today. So one thing we wanted to get on the mic here and chat real quick about something that's been on your mind, Taylor, which is how to de-stress a distressed business. And of course, a lot of businesses probably feel like they're in that position. And of course, we're going into this season or the time of the year in which I think distress becomes a lot more acute for a lot of businesses as well. So we want to talk through a little bit of like maybe brand therapy or business therapy for those moments when you're in that space. And so let's kick it off, maybe having you give us some background to kind of why this topic came to mind, and then maybe defining a distressed business a little bit. So yeah, let's start there. How did this come to mind?
This week, I have sat with founders for 3 very well-known, successful e-commerce brands to help them process significant layoffs and cost reductions to their organization. A lot of the work we do at CTC is about helping people get their business towards profitability. And for a bunch of e-commerce brands, that is about a significant reset in the way that their business operates, coming out of an era, COVID namely, where things worked differently, where the size of their business grew, their OpEx grew in correspondence with that. And now all of a sudden that revenue growth has plateaued, or their media dollars are less efficient than they have been historically. And they now have to make significant changes to their organization to do it. And these are hard conversations, emotional conversations, and there's an immense amount of stress carried. I've been through it personally. We went through this here at CTC ourselves at the end of 2022. And I know this life. And so I guarantee you, besides the ones that I talk to every day that are in this situation, there are people listening that have this problem, that are experiencing stress because their business is distressed.
Yeah. So maybe I want to maybe figure out how to distinguish this from some conversations we've already had, because talking about, I think, the shift in the world state from COVID to now has been something that we've been talking about for a while. So what is it about this moment, here we are, end of August 2024, when this is being recorded, that brings this to mind, I guess?
So I think you asked earlier about a definition for a distressed business. And I think what I would say is that a distressed business is one in which the future cash flows go to zero.
Mm-hmm.
That as you look out at the present state of the business, is that every month your bank account decreases in size with no immediate end to that pattern. And that has been the case for some of these brands for many years. The problem now is they've already taken the loan. So there's no more debt available to get. They're already maxed out on debt, and their business isn't worth anything. So they can't go raise money, or it's worth substantially less than they would want to raise equity. So there's no cash available.
Mm-hmm.
So now is the moment and impetus for change. Whereas before there was enough money in the bank account, either from historical success, from debt financing, or from equity raised to be able to survive through a bunch of poor performance. But now as they look out, there's no more money and the bank account's going to go to zero if they don't make a
Right.
change. And that may happen 90 days from now, that may be 9 months from now, that may be a year from now, but they're looking out and going, if something doesn't fundamentally change, we go to zero.
Got it. Gotcha. That makes sense. So the storm clouds are finally on the horizon for a lot of brands after a period of time. I guess that makes sense.
That's right. And there's a very real process that I can imagine is probably something like dealing with a terminal diagnosis or
Mhm.
something that business owners go through, which is like there's a long period of denial.
Yeah.
There's a period of just sort of not wanting to look, a period of not because actually entering into that space and accepting that reality is actually really
Yeah.
challenging. It's embarrassing. It's a sense of personal failure. There's a lot contained in that space that you have to process and be willing to go through as an individual founder in order to get the business where you need to go. And there's some people that are sort of like can courageously run into that. For other people, it takes a little more time, but it's a hard thing to go
Yeah.
through.
Okay. So then I want to talk about this from two perspectives, right? So the like the practicals of de-stressing the business, which we sort of talked about a little bit before we hit record, like the very specific tactical changes that you can make to relieve some of that pressure. And then just like digging into maybe from your experience too, and a little bit from mine as well, like what actually de-stressing yourself in the midst of this, because I think that's obviously like the way that you have to sort of personally comport yourself to make this happen is obviously absolutely critical
Yeah.
to this. So let's start with the practicals. Just kind of walk us through the steps that you took maybe with these businesses to
Yeah. I'm going to
take
give
it.
you, I'm going to give you 3 steps to de-stressing your distressed business. Step 1 is obviously going to be around cost reduction. And it's specifically, you're going to try to bring your OPEX into relationship with your returning customer contribution margin. Okay. So let's talk about and define a few of these things. OPEX at CTC, we would define as all fixed costs below the line on your P&L that are not inclusive of digital marketing spend for the sake of driving revenue. So your Facebook spend, your Google spend, your Pinterest spend, your TikTok spend, take that out of the OPEX number. Don't include your cost of goods. Don't include your shipping and fulfillment expense. Don't include your payment processor fees. Every other fixed expense is in OPEX. That number we want to bring into relationship with your returning customer contribution margin. So if you were to break your revenue for the year into new customer revenue and returning customer revenue, how much marginal dollars exist every month from your returning customers? If that number covers your OPEX, so returning customer contribution is greater than OPEX, you then can get new customer acquisition to neutrality and you can survive as a business. So in theory, if you turned off all advertising, you would still survive as a business. And this gives you a constraint on how you should grow your fixed costs is relative to the growth of your existing customer revenue. Now, for some of you, that's going to be really, really lean. For some of you, oh, we actually have a lot of that. And so it's not going to be as big of an obligation. But that number is really, really important. And this is true for 95% of businesses. I'm going to caveat that there are always businesses where their LTV is basically zero and every month they have to go get all new customers. And so I'm going to acknowledge that there are exceptions to this general rule. But the question of how far to cut is often contained in this answer because part 2 of this problem is we can't just cut our way to health.
Mhm.
Eventually, we have to grow, which means we have to be able to invest in new customer acquisition. And we have to be able to do that at neutral, break even on new customer contribution, or a slight loss, even to restart the growth engine and get the business back to future health, too. So, to do that, we need to get as lean as possible on the OPEX. And what I'll say is, this is like an Elon Musk principle time. Delete until you've deleted too far and you have to add something back.
Mm.
If you don't find yourself having to add something back because you've cut too far, you have not cut enough.
Yeah. If you want to grow your business, but need a partner who really understands your industry, it's time to check out Mercury Working Capital. Mercury is the all-in-one banking and lending solution for e-commerce businesses. In addition to powerful accounts and built-in financial workflows, they now offer working capital loans made with you in mind. Get started at mercury.com/CTC to see if you're eligible for a working capital loan with a fixed weekly repayment schedule, no personal guarantee, and no prepayment penalties. That's mercury.com/CTC. Okay, well, let's keep rolling down the actually, maybe it would be interesting to ask, like, what's the biggest barrier to making those cuts on the OpEx side? Now, I can imagine one of them is psychologically having to lay people off, but,
Yes.
I mean, is that the biggest one, or are there other, like, maybe unexpected
No, there's
roadblocks?
more.
Yeah,
Yeah. So laying people off is an obvious one. It's painful. These are people you care about. There's a lot of emotion contained in it. It's a declaration of your own failure to them and a promise that you made to them that made them show up and trust you with their life. That's a big
yeah.
deal. It's hard. The second one, though, is you have to probably go back on your word.
Hmm,
What do I mean by that? You've signed contracts, likely for 12-month commitments to software or vendor agreements to do a production in the future that you need to go back and say, I can't do this anymore. And you need to renegotiate every term that you can, or in some cases say, I just can't pay you. I'm sorry. I'll intend to in the future. You can work out a payment plan. We can work out a restructure. We can work out a buyout. But that's a lot of people who you probably made a commitment to when things were awesome and you were cool and it was great, that you have to kind of go back to humbly and say, I'm sorry, we're not in a position, I can't fulfill this obligation anymore. Can you work with me? Can we adjust it? Can we get to different terms on those agreements? And that is just like repeatedly calling and doing that with a bunch of vendors just
yeah,
sucks. It feels like you misled a bunch of people and nobody likes being that
yeah,
person.
that makes sense. Okay, so we laid out 1 and 2, I think. So let's jump into our 3rd or
Let me give the last
yeah, yeah.
one in the OpEx side.
Oh, sure.
You have become accustomed to a lifestyle you're
Yeah,
probably gonna
yeah.
have to let go of.
Exactly.
So, a lot of that is in office. I'm watching people give up beautiful office spaces. We gave up a beautiful office space. Part of that was COVID, but it forced us into it. But that was a space that meant something, that was a visual representation of something you had created that now I remember when I was really depressed when I was in a WeWork
Mm,
office 8 years into my business. I manufactured energy, but I felt like a total like, how did I end up back here? Like, this is where I started. How is this possible? And that definitely is a lifestyle adjustment that like once you've tasted something at the higher level, it's really hard to go back to the early days. But it is the only way.
yeah, right. Well, it's a fascinating thing of human nature, right? That every comfort added becomes the potential for a discomfort later when you lose it. And yeah,
Fact.
exactly. All right. Okay, so let's keep rolling down. So we mentioned relationship between your existing customer revenue and then your OpEx, and then the second was around acquisition and how to kind of repair that.
Yeah.
I think, did we finish talking through that? Okay,
No.
so let's
So
go
the
to that.
second thing is that you have to reset the organizational expectation that you don't lose money acquiring
Mhm.
customers. And every one of these organizations that I've seen, what happens is it's like boiling a frog inside the organization, which is the belief that that's no longer a viable outcome just sort of slowly becomes
Mm,
accepted. And we slowly accept slightly worse, slightly worse, slightly worse, slightly worse, Russ, to the point that we're losing tons of money acquiring customers, and some of them may be net never
mm,
profitable. It is absolutely profitable in every e-commerce business category to at least break even on first order, with the main exception being subscription businesses where you're trying to sell someone a recurring purchase. It's very difficult to do that in first order profit. But every other product category should demand, if you have a cash crisis and are a distressed business, to get your first order, your new customer acquisition back to break even.
mhm,
And that boundary, in many of these cases, this is all about reinstituting a new set of laws that govern the organization. And what I'll tell you is your people's behavior will reorient. They'll resist it, they'll fight it. Some people might need to go because they can't accept it, but you will find people who accept those new laws and work within them, and you will watch your behavior change.
mhm,
And what that change usually looks like is you start ruthlessly pursuing inefficient
mhm,
dollars being spent. And that leads to the third thing, the third step of de-stressing a distressed business. You're going to do way less things.
mhm,
What do I mean by that? One of the biggest suckers of profitability that I see is channel expansion. The amount of e-commerce businesses running unprofitable international business units in Canada and the UK and Australia and spending tons of time and energy trying to prop up these tiny little markets that are actually negative contributing is a lot.
mhm,
And I get it. International expansion is sexy. It sounds fun. There may be a time for that we go after it later. But today, if it's negative contributing, it's gone. Amazon marketplaces. This is another thing. I see people roll out into Amazon with no sense of what is the plan between .com and Amazon, how they're going to work together. Are we going to look at these things combined? Are they different? Is one taking from the other? They've never done any geo holdout on the impact of their meta dollars across these channels. So they have no clarity of action. It's all confusion. When you aren't clear, you cut it.
Mhm.
One of the big changes that people have to go through is when we come in, they'll say, like, well, before we cut that channel, we should do a holdout study to find out if it's actually working. And I say, no, 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 that's not how we work anymore. In order to spend the dollar, you have to have proven that it's
Mhm.
working. You don't need to prove that it's working to keep it on or to turn it off. It starts off.
Yeah.
And then you run it and find out if it's working and then turn it on. But if you don't have validation, it's gone. Then you reconstruct from there. And that so around all of those ideas. So that's gonna be reduction of distribution channels, namely international marketplaces, that retail office you might have open, or the retail storefront you might have open, the cart that you're selling in the Grove, whatever it might be. And then it's also going to be media channels, TV, the harder to prove ones that you're like, I think it's working. My survey data says, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. We're going to introduce a root ground truth around incrementality that says if we don't have validation that this channel is creating incremental contribution margin, it goes off until we can create that validation and then it can be turned back on.
Mhm.
And so that process of reduction, because remember, you're about to have a way leaner creative staff too, because you're going to have to reduce OpEx. So we got to be able to focus on one thing in one channel, probably,
Yeah.
maybe two between email, SMS, and Meta and Google. Like usually it's getting back to the core, getting really good and clear on the goals and expectations there, getting to first order profitability or break even, and then asking ourselves, where do we go from here?
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is for both points 2 and 3, one about the sort of ruthless efficiency of acquisition and then one paring down to what works. Let's talk about like what are some of the psychological roadblocks or counter wins that would create a situation, let's say, where on paper, if it's like, let's be ruthless about efficiency, you would think that everybody on the team would be like, yeah, great. But in practicality, what are the things that create that sort of like maybe unrest or whatever in your team for both of those things?
Because they've been trying it for a long time and it's never happened.
Yeah.
And so they don't actually believe it's possible. You
Interesting.
say first order break even, and they say,
This can't be
yeah,
done. Yeah.
right. Like, can't be done. Right. And so you look in the Meta account, and yeah, they've tried a lot of different things and a lot of different bidding strategies with all different, and then you're like, why is this on? And then you're like, well, what about this PMAX campaign? What's the target and why? And what you discover very quickly is that in all of the trying, there's total lack of clarity about the decision making framework
Mhm.
where we come in and it's like, okay, contribution margin is the rule of law. AMER then is a non-violatable principle that your ad spend is subordinate to. Then you need to create an in-platform causal relationship between this target and that AMER. And we're only going to move if we have those things in order. And the clarity of the decision and information hierarchy and how we decide things is the most important part. Because what happens is everybody has a validation for every decision. Because if I'm on the line for the TV spend, then I'm going to work my ass off to find data that validates the
Mhm.
decision. And if I'm on the hook for the performance of this meta ad campaign, and so what happens is you see all these tools. There's survey data, there's Northbeam, there's platform, and somebody can make a case for everything all the time, even in a business that's losing money.
Mhm.
Like there's very rarely a thing that everybody universally goes, yeah, that's really bad spend.
Mhm.
Of course not, because somebody chose to do it. And so they're going to have thought really hard about how when this moment comes, they're going to validate that decision. Well, we have these 10 influencers, but this one, the quality is different. And like, and so you're going to meet, if you allow for how we make decisions to be on any different parameter, you will never make a decision because everyone will be able to validate everything.
Mhm.
So you have to bring all the decision making subordinate to one truth. And here's the thing. It's not, you will never actually get to a place where you can objectively say that you're 100% right, that that's the truth. But that's not the important thing here. The important thing is get to best available truth. I think the gold standard is incrementality, geo holdout. Okay, that's would be gold standard. Second from there would probably be some sort of short-term click optimization in channel would be secondary. If you love, your Northbeam MTA one day click, I don't really care. I mean, I do care, but I'd be willing to allow everything to be subordinate to a universal truth somewhere is the most important thing. And then no one's allowed to bring me survey studies. No one's allowed to don't bring any other cases. Right now, we only make decisions this way and we reallocate and narrow accordingly.
Mhm.
Because somewhere there's an opportunity cost to the dollars. Like there's no way all those channels are reporting the exact same incremental return. So we're narrowing the opportunity cost. We have to get AMER back to break even. And the reality is right now it's not. So I don't care about what anybody's case is for this media
Mhm.
mix. It's not working. Full stop. New customer break even. That's the rule.
Mhm.
We're going forward against that principle and we're going to rebuild against it. And part of this is like the easy part of being the external person is that I carry none of the responsibility for the failure thus far. So I can walk in really easily and say, I'm willing to put myself on the hook for the future. I'm not actually really interested in judging anyone, but here's the new set of parameters, go forward. And so in many cases, this is why external groups are brought in for this, because you can't actually, there's too much at stake for everybody to suddenly turn around and go, you know what? None of this is working.
Mhm.
We have to stop, because that would likely mean you failed in some way, which is very risky for people to declare. Like I don't actually think that we should have a reasonable expectation that people stand up and take responsibility at the risk of their own life.
Mhm.
Like I don't think that's actually human behavior. That if you knew there was the death penalty, that you would walk into the police station and be like, "It was me." Like I think you should expect in most people, if they think that's the consequence, they will run,
Yeah.
they will hide. And I think that's the same is true in their job, and that you shouldn't actually expect
Yeah.
different from them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and so, I mean, it sounds too that the psychological roadblocks or the roadblocks for the business owner for number 3, which is, of course, paring down the amount of distribution channels, is gonna be really, really similar in that somebody's responsible for, like, international distribution or whatever, and it's their lifeblood, and you're saying it
That's
doesn't
right.
work, and they have to cut it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not gonna come to you, the CEO, one day and be like, "Hey, you know this job you've given me? Bad idea. Thanks for everything."
Yeah.
It's just like you should never expect that that will occur. So I think that's where sometimes the using an external party to help you make those decisions, and candidly someone to challenge you. Like a lot of times I know the emotional psychology of CEO, having
Mhm.
been through this because I've been through it myself, and so I can sort of say, "Hey, I think you're justifying right now.
Mm.
I don't know that that's true. I think if you got rid of that cost, you actually might find out it's not as critical as you think it is." Or I can go, "Okay, cool. You want to keep that one? What about this one? Oh, shoot. Well, one of them has to go. Which one do you like
Mhm.
less?" You know, and that's sort of like Marie Kondo,
Yeah.
like someone to sort of hold up and force you, like, we're getting rid of one of these two things. You can choose, but we're getting rid of one of them.
Mm.
Is just a process that people need, because otherwise it's like the clutter in your house. You'll just gather it because it's like, no, one day I'm going to wear that shirt. I just know I am.
Mhm.
I have this T-shirt that I bought from Shireen, from Shireen's
Yeah, yeah.
brand, and it's like this picture of when Tiger Woods got a
Oh,
DUI,
yeah.
and it says like I'm down
Yeah.
bad. And it's like this. It's hilarious, and I'm like, I can't wait to go to Vegas because I'm going to wear this
Yeah.
shirt. And I haven't been to Vegas in years, and it just sits in my closet, right? And so it's like that. We do that same thing with software or different, or we do it with all people. We do it all sorts of things.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I was gonna say I have a shirt from her that features a deep fried image of an Arby's beef and cheddar. And I really haven't found the perfect opportunity for it yet, but it's coming. I just
but
gotta
it's
yeah,
coming. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly, exactly.
Cool. So, you dug into this a little bit, like, just how much of almost a therapeutic process this is, or how much of a psychological process this is. So talk to me a little bit about so the maybe another definition of de-stressing, which is, like, how does one, as the person that's responsible for these decisions, handle the stress? Like, given as you've been somebody who's been in this situation before, like,
Yeah.
what are your tips for, I don't know, how to adjust your mindset to be able to face these?
What I watch happen is as soon as it's like they all knew it was
Mm,
there,
mm,
and it's and then all of a sudden when they realize that there's a plan that might get them out of it, the amount of energy that I watch literally restore into their body is transformative.
mm,
It's like, "Oh my gosh, I've named my boogie monster,
mhm.
and now there might be a way out." It's a lot of what I imagine people go through when they get, like, discovered for an addiction or things like
Yeah.
that, where all of a sudden it's like, it's actually freedom and energy that I might not any longer be trapped in this thing.
Mhm.
And it is cathartic. It's like a giant weight comes off. And even though the work is still to be done, these people are all really capable of
Yeah.
work. It's not, they got here because they can work really hard. No one's afraid of that. It's literally the emotional toil of someone saw my P&L. They know that I'm not this amazing person that maybe I had wanted people to think I am. Like,
Yeah.
um, and when you get through that though, and you realize you're okay and your people are still kind of standing by you, and maybe we could do this different, and hope starts to return,
Mhm.
it's like, it's a really powerful idea. So getting to clarity of the plan, and then you still have to walk through the emotional door. The next hurdle is really usually around the people thing. And that's one of those things that what I've learned is that's also hubris, in that, like, I think people need me more than they ever
Mm.
have. Like, most of the vast majority of the people that have been let go from CTC are thriving. They're killing
Yeah.
it. Some of them better than they were here, in a way that they're really talented folks that have in-demand skills that I'm sure that's not universally the case, but I'm not that important. Now, there's a broken promise, and that's still worth acknowledging, and you should be gracious and kind and to the best of your ability, offer them care in whatever way you can, but they're going to be okay and most likely in our industry.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot of confidence in that you can take hold of.
Yeah. I mean, fascinating that the main thing here is the first step to recovery is admitting that you have a problem. And
Yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah, right. It's so real.
and
So many
yeah,
parallels. So many
that's
parallels that I
interesting.
think are between
Okay,
that.
well, so let's draw one more parallel kind of here at the end then, which is that idea that like once you've kicked the addiction the first time, there's always obviously the issue of relapse, and this is one of the reasons that in addiction science, abstinence is always is often recommended because you're at the
Yep.
highest amount of control over it when you're not under the influence of it at all, right? So
Yeah.
once you're in that position, let's say, where you've been able to, let's say, execute properly on the three things that you laid out, how do you avoid falling back into those traps? What are the things that you can put in place to make sure that that kind of thinking doesn't start to slip back in?
Yeah, so I mean, like, we could continue on this metaphor,
Yeah.
right? If you think about, you have a sponsor, you have meetings, you have these very defined boundaries that you repeatedly participate in because you're sort of declaring that, like, left to my own devices, I probably will go
Mhm.
back, right? And so I think one of the roles that we play in these relationships is helping people define the constraints and track progress against them every single day.
Mhm.
So what's going to happen is every day we're going to look at your AMER in the same way. Maybe every day you're going to call your sponsor. Like, there's just this thing that I violate all the time. I'm going to have to show it to somebody every single day, and we're all going to look at it and we're going to say, did I achieve it or not achieve it? And if so, we're going to course correct immediately.
Mhm.
So because really the problem in this realm is like persistent bad decision making in the wrong direction. You're never going to be perfectly efficient with your spend every day, but how quickly can you course correct? And I think that is some of the beauty of the system that we've developed. I was on a call this week with the founder of a really well-known legendary e-commerce brand, and he was like, "Oh, so you build the railways for my team to operate
Mhm.
on?" And I was like, "Yes, I feel heard and seen." Is that like, and if you think about the metaphor, like, a train can't go off the
Yeah.
tracks. It doesn't get to choose where it drives, right? Like, it has a laid out path and it only moves on that path.
Yeah.
And so I think in some ways, a system like our profit system is intended to help people that maybe need a little less leeway in how far they're allowed to go left and right for a period. Is that, no, we're going to define the parameters, or we're going to move together, move an entire organization in one path.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think like that idea of like providing parameters sounds like in some ways this is like the takeaway for this whole conversation. I think about one time when I was like just out of college and I bought a $9,000 car for $6,000, negotiated them down, and I felt great. But the reason I did is I only had $6,000. So I knew it. Like I knew that that was my restraint and
That's
I said
right.
I'm walking unless I could pay this much and they give it to me, right? And
That's right.
that
That's
was
right.
that was the most powerful thing that I had was that I had that restriction, right? But
That's so
yeah,
good. And I think that in a lot of ways, the danger is the credit cards and debt facilities is that we never actually force that boundary. And
yeah,
so it actually is the bank account that ultimately forces people into exactly that. You go back to the vendor and you just say, I literally can't pay.
yeah.
I don't. So what are we going to do together? But yeah, that's good. Constraints, they can be manufactured with helpful people around you, hopefully before they exist in reality. But what is the phrase? Consequences are often a signpost to
Yeah.
reality. Those are usually what bring people into this, is that there's some consequence where they've looked out and they go, I'm going to die if I don't make a change. And the good news is there's hope and there's possibility and you can make it happen, because a lot of these businesses are actually really still great brands that people love the product and there's a lot of revenue there. And so there's a possibility for change.
That's right, folks. All right. Well, if you would like to talk to us about this, we're here for you. commonthreadco.com, hit the hire us button. Let us know that you want to chat and we're happy to talk about it. But
Yeah. And look, I would say I am amongst a group of people in the world that have uniquely been through this and walked with a lot of people
yeah.
through this. So the emotional weight of it all, like, even if you just want to DM and talk and think about, I know, like, buying another thing sounds counter
Sure.
to the idea of what we're talking about in the middle of all of
Mhm.
this, but I'm here. My DMs are open and I would love to process with you. If you're looking out at your business and it feels sort of hopeless, I think we could be of use in that
Awesome.
circumstance.
Cool, guys. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. And we will chat with you again next week. All right. Take care.